Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo podcast. This week, the Alamo marks an extraordinary new chapter in the site's 300-year history with the official construction kickoff of the Alamo Visitor Center and Museum. Today, we reveal the latest plans for the ambitious space, what you can expect to see as you walk through each gallery, and the detailed work behind the scenes to truly tell a story bigger than Texas. I'm your host, Emily Baucom. We're joined by Dr. Kate Rogers, Executive Director of the Alamo Trust. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
We can't say this enough. This is a momentous occasion as we kick off construction on the Visitor Center and Museum. Walk us through all the experts here in San Antonio and from around the world who are helping us plan for what will be inside.
Well, we have a great team of consultants that have been working on the project for several years now. So the program manager, the person or team overseeing the entire visitor experience, all of the exhibits, as well as the narrative, the interpretive plan that will help inform all the stories that will be told inside the space. That's Gallagher and Associates from Maryland, but they have offices in many locations, and they've done other similar projects your listeners might be aware of. So if you've been to Gettysburg or Normandy or the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, then you've experienced Gallagher's work. We also have Gensler's the lead architect on the project. OJB is the landscape architect, and a number of sub-consultants underneath them. And then, of course, our wonderful partners in Clark Guido, which is a joint venture. Those are the general contractors on the project. And so we've been in selective or soft demolition now for several weeks, but now we're getting ready to start the official construction.
You're also working with local experts, including our team of Alamo experts.
Yes, indeed. So the narrative or the interpretive plan, as I mentioned, is being written, if you will, by a team of historians. There's about 18 historians who are on the project, depending on their area of academic expertise. Many of them, as you might imagine, are from Texas or other parts of the United States, but some are actually international. So, for example, one of the foremost experts on Santa Ana in the world is actually located in the UK. So we reach out to these different experts as needed to help fill out the story that will be told. Inside the 8 galleries, this new museum is 160,000 square feet in total, with 8 chronological galleries telling the full history of the Alamo.
You've even taken trips to Spain and to Mexico to really gather the international community with this project.
One of the things that I'm really proud that the team has been working on over the past year is bringing in artifacts so we can tell the Alamo story through objects, through documents, through real life objects that people would have used in the 1830s and beyond. And to do that, we've been looking far and wide. If you've had on your podcast, right, people have been submitting objects, which has been a huge success. But in addition to that, we really wanted to travel to where it all began. So we went to Spain. We've now been a couple of times in search of specific documents related to the founding of Mission San Antonio de Valero. Also, the orders from the king who sent the families from the Canary Islands, the 16 families who originally settled San Antonio, a really important part of the story. And then we did the same in Mexico. Went to Mexico City, Cholula, Querétaro, and Celaya, looking for the original documents that the friars would have written about the founding of the mission. And interestingly, a lot of people think that the friars who founded the missions would have come directly from Spain, but in reality, they actually came from Querétaro, Mexico. That's where they studied in the Templo there.
Incredible. For some of our newer podcast listeners, can you please explain where the museum will be?
Yes, so the museum is actually going to be located directly across from the Alamo Church. So that's the most famous structure. That's the one that everybody knows. Directly across Alamo Street from that, there's 3 historic structures. There's on the left-hand side, if you're looking at the building, is the Crockett Building, originally constructed in 1882. And then over on the right is the Woolworth Building, which is a state antiquities landmark because of its role in the civil rights movement here in San Antonio. So we're doing an adaptive reuse of those buildings. We're not tearing them down. Instead, we're actually preserving as much of the historic fabric as we can. So inside the Crockett, for example, that includes the original limestone walls. Inside the Woolworth, it includes some historic tiles, a tarpon that's out front. So as much as we possibly can to help those buildings tell the story of all the things that have happened here on the grounds of the Alamo since the very beginning.
These buildings date back to the 1880s.
Yes, indeed.
The Alamo Church, Lawn Barrack, and Gardens are all completely free for visitors by state statute, and the entire first floor of the Visitor Center and Museum will be free as well. What can people see for free when they come?
Well, we want to make sure that there's plenty to see and do for free. As you mentioned, Church and Long Barrack will always be. All of our outdoor exhibits as well, which we've added a number, the Palisade, the 18-pounder, the all-new Mission Gate and Lunette. Those are all also free. But the first floor of the museum will also be a place where you can get the full history without having to purchase a ticket necessarily. So in the front of the lobby space, there's a series of vignettes, bronze statuary that will tell the full history. They're vignettes of real people who had an impact on what happened here, starting with the indigenous people some 10,000 years ago and moving all the way up to what we call the preservation era, and a beautiful vignette of Clara Driscoll and Idina de Zavala, the founders of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, who saved the Alamo. So they're both women are known as the saviors of the Alamo. In addition, there'll be an interpretation of the West Wall in glass. So the West Wall of the original mission and fort would have run right through those structures. So we'll do this interpretive wall that will include panels of text, but also artifacts in the wall itself. There'll be a brand new cafe, the Travis Cafe, which will be lovely. A brand new, much larger retail space or gift shop. The Alamo gift shop is still quite popular. And then also a civil rights exhibit. So in the floor of the Woolworth building, you can still see where the original lunch counter once stood. So there'll be this wonderful interactive experience where you can actually sit at the lunch counter and digitally see images and learn more about that history and the leaders locally who led a very peaceful integration of 7 lunch counters on one day in San Antonio.
The Visitor Center and Museum will also have Riverwalk access, so if you're approaching from the river, you can come see the Alamo.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, those are number 1 and number 2 tourist attractions in the state of Texas, the Riverwalk and the Alamo. And so we want to maintain that connection. Also really important for visitors to understand how water played a really critical role in the original settlement of the missions and the evolution of San Antonio as a community.
And then once you move upstairs to the ticketed experiences, you will go on a truly immersive journey through time. As we go through each gallery, I'd love for you to share what we mean when we say immersive.
Certainly. So as I mentioned, the first indigenous people would have arrived in this part of Texas 10, 12,000 years ago. So we start the story there in what we call the Yanaguana. So you'll step into the flora and fauna that would have been present in South Texas at that time. You'll make your way learning about spiritual life and food ways. How were these people able to carve a productive life out of this very harsh environment? And then finally, that gallery ends with a really important message, which is the fact that many of the descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants still live amongst us today. So we'll have a wonderful oral history film that'll include real stories of real people. Then you enter the Mission Era Gallery, or Spanish Texas, if you will. And so that starts at the 1500s when the Spanish first arrived in Texas, all the way up to the secularization of the mission in 1793. And it really talks about mission life. We have a nice section on the Canary Island families, but we also have in the center a well that is an interactive well where there's floating images of people and objects, and you can click on them and learn more about them. So no matter how you like to learn, whether you like to read or you're more into digital assets, there'll be something for everyone. The next gallery really focuses on Mexican Texas, and it's that really conflict-ridden period between 1805 and 1835 when Mexico first fights for its own independence from Spain in a bloody revolution that really the tale of it lasted for many years, even after the passage of the Constitution of 1824, lots of changes in leadership, and eventually that conflict spilled over into Texas and the Texas Revolution. Then you get into the battle itself. The Battle of March 6, 1836, that's why most people come to the Alamo. That's what they know. They've watched a movie or read a book, and they come to learn more about Davy Crockett and the other Alamo defenders. So in that gallery in particular, we have this wonderful immersive projection-based experience. So if you've been to an art experience like Van Gogh, where you're literally surrounded by the painting, this will be quite similar, except for you'll feel as though you're inside the walls of the fort in those early morning hours of March the 6th. We'll have a section that really talks about the military history and unpacks the 13 days of the siege. And then you move into 2 really important parts of San Antonio history that are not well known. The Alamo was left in ruins after the battle. The United States Army first comes to Texas in the mid-1840s and establishes an outpost, a really important outpost for westward expansion at the Alamo. And the United States Army is actually the first one who put a roof on the Alamo, a wooden gabled roof. But they also added the famous parapet, that shape up top of the church that is so infamous today. And then we get into, again, the preservation era. The site was under the purview of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas for over 100 years, which is absolutely incredible. And the women really led the charge to save the Alamo from commercial encroachment. And that was largely led by Clara Driscoll, who was just 22 years old when she purchased the Alamo from the state of Texas to save it, and Nadina de Zavala. And then that leads us to that's the 20th century, if you will. That's when the Alamo becomes known as the Shrine of Texas Liberty. Hollywood becomes very enamored with the story. Davy Crockett becomes a hero of the 1950s, larger than life. And that leads you to the final gallery, which is the impact of the Alamo on popular culture. So everything from, Pee Wee Herman's bike to Sandra Bullock in front of the Alamo, John Wayne, Fess Parker, all the things you might expect, even a boy's bedroom from the 1950s that's decked out all in Crockett, the bedspread, the rug, the toys on the shelf, the clothes in the closet. So we'll really dive into that, again, that impact that the Alamo has had on popular culture for all these many years.
You talk about the flora and fauna of the Indigenous era, the wishing well of the Mission era, feeling like you're within the walls of the fort during the battle. That is a new museum experience.
Yes.
We're no longer talking 2D. This is 3D. You feel like you're part of history.
That's right. And to that end, one of the main attractions will actually be on the second floor of the museum. It's the all-new 4D theater. So that will include not one, but 2 IMAX-sized screens. You'll be literally surrounded by Texas, sitting in this theater. And again, in a relatively short amount of time, in about 30 minutes, you can get the full history. Again, starting at the Indigenous era, all the way up to present times. You'll come to the climax of the battle in the midst of this film, and your seat will shake, and the embers will fly, and the smoke will come, and you really will feel like you're there. So imagine you're in San Antonio for a convention, for example. You don't have a lot of time, but you really want to experience the Alamo. Well, that's a great way to do it.
A lot of cultural facilities like museums, planetariums, and aquariums, they have really big theaters. People are very used to seeing those. But as you said, we're going to have a spin on it, and no one has really experienced 4D before.
There's a 4D theater at the Bullock Museum, for example. There's one at the World War II Museum. But the great news that we're doing this project today in 2024 is that we can leverage all of the amazing technology that is available today. So we will have a theater that is unlike anything else in the country. And the person we're working with on the production, Donna Lawrence, has done this type of thematic or theatrical production for other cultural attractions across the country.
Right now, we have more than 500 artifacts on display. Once the visitor center and museum is open, thousands.
Absolutely. Objects are a really important way to convey history. And we have a wonderful curatorial team. We've actually, through loans and acquisitions, added over 1,000 new objects to the Alamo collection just in the last year. So you think about, there's never been an institution that has collected Alamo specifically. We have Texas history and so forth, but not just Alamo. And so most of the items have been spread to the winds in private collections. And now that this project is underway, many people are coming forward and saying, I have this, I have that, I have a painting, I have a gun collection, and I would love for the visitors at the Alamo to be able to enjoy it.
Now that there's a place to put it.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a lot of meat to this museum, a lot of content, but we're not done. We're actually adding extra levels to the building for an event space that's as big as Texas.
Absolutely. And so you and I have talked before, Emily, one of our commitments to the state of Texas, who's our largest investor, right? Last legislative session, we were given an appropriation of $400 million, which is obviously really important to a $550 million project overall. So we're very grateful for that support. But we also committed that we won't come back and ask for operating dollars. So, for your listeners, you'll see across the property, there's a number of event venues so people can have events here at the Alamo. There's a boardroom on the 4th floor of the new museum. And as you mentioned, there's this spectacular new event center, rooftop event center that will hold up to 700 people for a seated dinner. It's got terraces on 3 sides, so you're looking the beautiful Alamo Church and gardens, but also really all of downtown San Antonio. So it will be a spectacular view in the daytime, but just stunning at night.
Once the visitor center and museum is complete in 2027, how do you envision the Ralston Family Collection Center will change?
Great question. Many of the objects in the Alamo exhibit that is currently on display inside the Ralston Family Collection Center will actually make their way across the street into the new visitor center and museum. The great news about that is that it gives us 10,000 square feet of space that we can use for temporary exhibitions. So we can curate our own programs. We can also bring in shows from other museums across the country. And the great news about that is it gives people a reason to come back. Sometimes people think, I've been to the Alamo, I've been there, done that, I've checked that box. But we want people to always have something new and exciting to see and do when they come to the Alamo in the future.
So completely hypothetical. Say we wanted an exhibit on San Jacinto. We then can use the collection center for that.
Absolutely. And in fact, as we prepare for the opening of the Visitor Center Museum in 2027, the team is working on our first exhibit, a temporary exhibit, that will actually focus on Bernardo Galvez. And that is for America 250 in 2026. Galvez was a really important figure in the American Revolution, not as well known, one of only a handful of people across the world that has been named an honorary American citizen, with people like Winston Churchill, for example. But he actually came to San Antonio, arrived in Galveston, Texas. That's what the city is named for. Came to San Antonio, negotiated with the friars here for a herd of cattle, which he then drove from San Antonio to Pensacola to feed the troops during the Revolution. And so we will tell that story beginning in 2026.
An amazing story that we can highlight. When it's all said and done, how long would you suggest visitors set aside to see the Alamo?
I think you can easily spend an entire day. So, in the past, maybe you spent an hour. You could literally spend an entire day, depending on what you want to see and do. Obviously, you're going to want to go see the church and the Long Barrack, the most important architectural artifacts on the grounds. If you want to do the temporary exhibit, the 4D theater, and all the galleries, easily a day. And the good news is, just like at larger museums like the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, your ticket will be good for 2 days. So if your kiddos get tired halfway through and you want to go take a break and maybe, go to SeaWorld or Fiesta Texas for the afternoon, or the Riverwalk, then you can come back the next day.
Completely relatable. The state of Texas, Bexar County, and the city of San Antonio have all thrown their support behind the Alamo plan. What does all that support signify to you?
I think it signifies consensus. That for many, many years, really as long as I've been alive, which is a good long while, people have imagined that we would do something at the Alamo, right? Because you don't want people to leave the Alamo and say something like, is that it? Or I thought it would be much bigger. We want people to leave having a profound experience when they come here, having learned something they didn't know before, and more importantly, wanting to go learn more. This project is enabling us to do that. In the past, when plans have been advanced, there was always something about them that maybe the county didn't support or the city didn't support. This is the first version of what we call the Alamo Plan that has had that broad support from the state, the city, and the county, all of whom are financial investors and great partners on the project.
This will truly put the Alamo in the pantheon of world-class historic sites.
Yes, so that's one of our big objectives, right, is to create a world-class visitor experience across the entire site. And in addition to that, to offer world-class educational programming for both students and teachers. So that's really the journey that we're on. It's an honor and an exciting time to be here at the Alamo.
Dr. Kate Rogers, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We'll be linking to more information on the Alamo plan, as well as photos and videos from this week's construction kickoff. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.